Welcome to the Global Empowerment Summit special panel on intergenerational empowerment today. A very good evening to our viewers. This is Arman from Melbourne, Sulaiman Petang, and Salam Sejahtera to all our friends in Kuala Lumpur, to viewers across the world watching us in our YouTube and Facebook platforms. A very warm welcome to you. I'm your host tonight. Joining me on our panel today with the Empowerment Group are Dr. Yo Pei Lee, co-partner of the Empowerment Group and a senior mental health counselor, researcher, and trainer. Dr. Yo is the dean of the Alpha Omega International College in Kuala Lumpur and a pioneer in the counseling field in Malaysia. We have Catherine Lee, co-partner of the Empowerment Group, executive director of the Kasih Hospice, and vice president of the Malaysian Hospice Council. And we also have Erin Indiani, co-partner of the Empowerment Group, trainer of Global Health Connect, and a counselor at Humankind. Thank you for joining us this evening. We are talking about intergenerational empowerment today. The world is on the brink of a major change and demographic milestone. Since the beginning of recorded history, young children have always outnumbered elders. In the coming years, the number of people aged 65 and above will outnumber those of children. Driven by fertility rates and outstanding improvement in life expectancy, population aging will not only continue but will also accelerate. It is in fact projected that the number of people aged 65 and older will grow to 1.5 billion by 2050, and mostly in developing countries. In this context, the theme for this year's Global Empowerment Summit is the young and the wise, let's be bold together. Empowerment is about having our own autonomy, voice, and agency. The big question for our panel tonight is how can we come together to empower individuals in all age groups to improve our mental well being, succeed in life, and achieve our full potential individually and as a community? Without further ado, let's get into the conversation on intergenerational empowerment today. I'll start with Dr. Yo. Dr. Yo, as a mental health professional working with children, our question to you is what does empowerment mean for children? Can we really empower young children? And what does it mean for their mental health? Off to you, Dr. Yo.
Okay, of course, the word empowerment is too big for a child to understand, but definitely as young as 2 years old, you will notice your little toddler will want to do things on their own. They will want to choose their own clothes, or wants to perhaps help you with some chores, which a lot of parents will say, please, sit down, go and play, because they don't want the child to mess things up, right? But then that little act, that little initiative of that little toddler is in itself, if the parents know if the parent has some patience, in that sense, they are really empowering them. In that sense, they are really guiding them bit by bit to really love chores instead of, scolding them and say, you don't come and disturb mommy. Yeah. So it's really about cooperating and then have the patience to lead and to guide them. Yeah. And it's really observation. Yeah. Children learn through observation, guidance. Yeah.
So
That's
it's
how.
allowing children to grow from and to be themselves and to have and to communicate with them, Dr. Yo, from what you're telling us. Um, uh, and I'll now extend this to the rest of our panel today. Eric, do you want to share some thoughts on this, please?
Yeah, I think when we are talking about children, right? I think the role of schools is equally important. Um, as we are talking about, children when they are starting to coming to schools, they start to connect with their peers. That is also part of empowerment because when they are starting to learn to communicate, to interact with each other. That is part of them is connecting with the community. In that sense, that is also empowering them to build a sense of belonging. So that is the one of it. And also, as we are talking about schools, I think it's the friendship, the relationship with the teachers, so called. That is also important, especially in schools. Mostly, it's all about following the rules, right? It's all about listening to the teachers, but not yes true to some extent, but to what extent that uh, our culture of our school culture can empower them, can empower the children if we are encouraging them to following rules. So that is one of the challenge that I think that I can share with you in terms of the roles of schools. Yeah.
This is a very good point you make, because at this point, as we know, that our school system are often quite hierarchical, and not only there's a hierarchy, but it's often the teachers, the administrators, that they have upper hand, right? So, and of course, in a school structure, you need that. But how do we balance that, and how do we really realign our education system to allow more voice of those who are learning? This probably will bring us to an issue of perhaps revisiting how we teach our children. So, Catherine, can I pass that to you? Will you have anything to to discuss on that?
On teaching, not so much per se. I come from the elderly perspective of empowerment. So on the elderly perspective, let us talk about the real elephant in the room, where growing old and power is concerned. It's and that word is ageism, and it's a word that people are very, very afraid of. It's very hard for us to sort of come out as an older person. um, Aging is supposed to be a process of degrees, but very often we are suddenly confronted with it. So it feels more like a crossing over for many people. And we invent all these euphemisms to talk about aging, especially if you're a woman. We have to hide behind jokes, or we hide behind Botox and changing ourselves. Or we embrace defiance and we dye our hair pink. We do all sorts of things, and we talk about it in a way that isn't absolutely natural. And one of the reasons is because it's such an uncomfortable thing to talk about. By itself, the word old is almost seen as sad. It has to be padded in order for us to swallow it. And why does this happen? A lot of this happens because we feel like we lose the right to affirm life. We lose power when we grow older, and that's one of the things I hope to combat, by talking about it, by having older people come out and talk about their experience and how they define things, and how they think the world define them, and with that we can change a lot of that context.
So, Catherine has just added another element to this, right? Which is when it comes to empowerment of those who are older, or as Andrea of the Global Empowerment Summit would say, those who are wiser. So, this brings us to really the question of not an either or, but how do we really empower different groups in the community together? So, we brought up the issue of ageism. Ageism, of course, I think the angle that Catherine took was about but those who are getting older and how do they deal with it. But another aspect of ageism is going back a little bit to our discussion that we're having about schools and communities and families, that often because of ageism the young don't have a voice. So that's what we hear, right? That I mean, and so going back again to the question we are talking about now, I'll pass it to Dr. Yo again on the education system as a whole. It is hierarchical, it is age based, and no doubt teachers need to have the authority. How do we empower children more in the learning process?
I really like what Catherine had just touched on, because education should begins from home. We should not just outsource it to the teachers, right? And right now we are seeing, the older generation being at home more free, and then they guiding the younger one, because this is a very different generation where the young are being brought up by their grandparents if they are not sent to the nanny. Yeah, both parents really now we know are dual career families. Yeah. So if you ask me, I really feel when it comes to imparting of values, imparting of life skills, it should start from home. Yeah.
So it's about guidance, right? And in this guidance process, Quite often when we want to instill our values, uh, some parents may also end up being quite authoritative. So how do we look at that, right? How do we engage with children? We want to guide them, we want to instill the right values, but at the same time give them that space and freedom. How do we balance this, Dr. Yo?
Boundaries. We need to set boundary. When it comes to child development, if you look at the development of a person's brain, right? Uh, Usually age 10 is one of a defining moment, because by age 10 our cognition develops. That means we are more able to think. Our emotional brain will develop first as a young child, and that's why children, they will just throw tantrum. When they are not happy, they will just cry, or they get angry. So we really can't talk sense with them, or we cannot expect them to think logically, because they don't have that capacity. Yeah. But age 10 onwards, as they begin to develop, as they begin to grow cognitively, and that's where we come in. Yeah. So in the initial year, it's really role modeling and parents guiding them. Yeah.
So, in other words, what we'll need is some adaptive parenting, right? So, there's not one parenting style that will suit at every age, but parents also have to take into account the different life stage cycles, right? And
Oh
uh,
yes.
and nurture their children accordingly. So, I was at a workshop recently where the trainer was telling us that guess who are actually the most mindful amongst all in a society, and the answer was children, because we as adults, right, we are often not mindful. We're thinking about the past, we're thinking of the future, whereas a child, right, a child wants a cake, they are mindful that that's the cake, right? So there, I mean, bearing in mind, so I think, just building on what Dr. Yo said, right, that children have different needs in different ages, right? And I think, and I will also apply my example there, that they can also be very mindful. So this is where the responsibility comes in parents to guide them, but at the same time give them the freedom and space to grow as they would like to grow.
Yeah,
In
I
the
would really say though, Aman, that's absolutely right, and it's not a very well-known fact that children are indeed very, very mindful, and we take that to mean that they are absolutely in the present, they are completely engaged to it, and in the present, not ruminating, not going into the past with regrets or things that they can't let go of, not worrying about the future. So they are utterly in the present moment. And in terms of intergeneration empowerment, we always think we are supposed to, as adults, we are the ones that's supposed to teach the children, when we actually have so much to learn from children themselves. And in terms of everyone being at home, we have a very unique opportunity to have that intergenerational learning, where we actually learn from each other. We learn communication styles, and that's really the first step, the biggest step, I would say, of getting that linked empowerment, giving to each other.
that's such a very powerful point that you make, right? That we look at it, that even my questions were framed initially as, how can we instill and teach, right? But there's so much we can learn from children as well. And both Dr. Yo and Catherine, you have brought up this issue of really unique situation where we are spending more time at home. And one of the lasting changes we're likely to see in the working world is working from home. Of course, there'll be a little bit more flexibility and a hybrid nature of it, meaning it won't be like last 18 months where we were confined at home. But for the first time ever, I suppose that the working world, right, whichever sector we belong to, will learn how to embrace working from home. So we'll be seeing a more flexible work arrangement. What does this mean for communication and for the intergenerational engagement? I'm open up the question to any one of you who is willing to take it.
Well, I would like to say something that sounds glaringly obvious, but actually isn't, which is and it sounds so simple, but to communicate well between generations, you have to want to communicate. And that sounds intuitive, right? But it's not. Because if you want to communicate, that means you dedicate effort, attention, and intention towards that act of communication. So it's not just I say XYZ, but my kids don't understand me. That is actually not expressing a desire to communicate. that is expressing your expectations of how you want others to listen to you. So we really have to come from where we are trying to communicate ourselves, whether we have that attention and that intention, and we're putting in effort towards that communication or not.
Yeah.
and that
Uh,
and that might not be easy, right? So, Erin, you were about to say something.
Yeah, I was just wanting to add on to what Catherine have said, right? I think when we are talking about communication and children, something that we need to remember is to recognize them as an individual and talk to them in their language, because children and our language are kind of like at a different level, you know. Children are more simple, straightforward, while we as an adult, we have learned through experiences a different way of communication. So I think it's important that us to go to the children level to build that communication with the children and recognize them as an individual, so we are willing to listen to them as well. Yeah.
So it's really about respect and agency, right? And the
Yes.
fact that a child also has their own rights, their own interests, and particularly during this last 18 months, because often we talk about what we have been through, all four of us in this discussion today, or rest of the community, the adults, right? But children had to deal with their own stresses along with that of their parents. And one big issue that has come up, of course, is the frequent disruption in school. Schools, as we know, play an important role not only as a provider of education, but also social and emotional learning for children. So, given that this has been disrupted, right? How do we come out from this, right? So, I mean, we have 18 months of disruption. What are the long-term impacts of this on children's mental health? Um, maybe Dr. Yo, uh, maybe
Um,
maybe
we can only speculate right now, but what is certain for now, during the pandemic, young people has been seen and shown they suffer from loneliness. Yeah. And can you imagine, as a teenagers, their hormone is raging, they are full of energy, and they're all stuck at home. And what do you expect them to do at home? Parents, you are working, you have no time for them. Yeah, what do you expect them to do, right, if it's not computer? Yeah. And I get lots of requests, to see their teenagers, from parents to see their teenagers, and asking me to recommend a rehab center for internet addiction. Yeah.
this is, of
So
course, a major issue now.
it looks like a major issue, but we really hope that it's just temporary. I think the kids are really looking forward to go back, out there and to really mingle and be free from this, prison house that they are in at this current time. Yeah. But I would say, yeah, learn to listen to your children's need instead of just judging them or seeing them from your perspective. Yeah. From our understanding. Yeah. But when children or when teenagers, they are on the computer, they are also studying, they are also chit-chatting, they are also listening to music, they are multitasking there. Yeah. So it's very hard to take away, punishing them by taking away the internet or the gadget from them.
So online, in other words, Dr. Yo, what you're saying is just not really just for entertainment or TikTok or Instagram, but it is also a learning tool for them. And I think we've seen, look, a big contentious issue for many parents is video games. It's okay,
Mm.
again, an issue of, I think, really the amount of time spent, because research has also shown that moderate usage of video games can be helpful for your cognitive development, can be helpful for improving concentration. And let's not also forget that for many children, the video game world is no more just like playing with your console and your joypad, but it's really a community that they have there. Um,
Yes.
so I think one important point here that comes out from this, if I put together what the panel just talked about, is really listening and communication. And that's why, as Asian parents, right, I would say that we are perhaps very good at when it comes to the physical and needs of children, whether it's food, clothing, or shelter. But when it comes to the emotional needs of children, right, are we really listening to them? And given that during this pandemic, they have to deal with the brunt of our own experiences, whether if you're having financial troubles, if you're having relationship problems, they have to deal with that. On top of that, they have their own isolation there as well. So the key point that we take from our discussion here is really communication and listening. And I hope that later in the last part of our discussion today, we can actually come up with some tips and strategies with the family level that we can adopt. But then now I'll kind of forward a bit to talking about older adults. Catherine started us off already talking about the older adults. Perhaps those aged 50 and above. I also began the discussion by saying that we are seeing a demographic change where they will see an increasingly aging population, even in countries like Malaysia. So, in this situation, right, what does empowerment really mean, Catherine? We're going to have many older people, fewer young people. From what you're telling us, perhaps the empowerment question will be about not only empowering the young, but also empowering the older, those who Andre calls as the wiser. Catherine, so would you like to tell us a bit more about that?
Oh, well, the thing with empowerment of elderly, and we can look at elder adults as 50 and above, and then elderly, the class of elderly would be officially WHO calls them 65 and above. And the elderly gap is, as you've mentioned, is going to double in the next in the next 10 years or so. And this is something we've not really dealt with on a society level. And since we're talking about communication, and this is a vast topic, let us stay in communication. I do see communication as being one of the big hurdles to overcome, especially intergenerational communication, which is the topic we're talking about today. Because as you go along the spectrum, different generations have different way of communication. In fact, scientifically, we know there is a slight shift in values and thinking every 4 years. So if you're looking at somebody who's in their mid 60s and trying to communicate with family members, for example, who are in their mid 20s, how do we do that? How do we share values, build a common language within the family structure or the workplace or people you just want to have that relationship with? It's very important to put the time and effort, and I've mentioned the intentionality behind building such rules, because in every relationship, you are essentially creating a norm, a cultural norm between two people. And you can't come into something just saying, these are my understanding of how things are. I expect you to understand them because I'm older. That really doesn't work anymore. So one of our biggest challenges, one of our biggest challenges, of course, is how do we come to the table and share meaning, and both of us sort of value the relationship enough to say, let us share meaning. When I say this is what I mean, and I respect you when you say this is what you mean. And this is going to be so important as we have a bigger and bigger elderly layer, that we understand what they say and they also understand what we mean. Because I work in a hospice, and one of the biggest problems at the end of life is just, you're confronted with heartbreaking stories about the lack of communication, of not building any context throughout your life, because nobody wants to talk about complex issues, feelings and emotions, heavy topics, until it's too late, and then you wait until the last minute, or when you're desperate to talk about it. We should not be doing that. We should be building context early on, when we are in our best states, when everyone feels safe, and that's what family time is useful for. It's not just about let's go out and enjoy ourselves. Let's have a good meal and talk about the latest movies or what we plan to do next. It's also asking each other, what's important to you? What do you mean when you say this? Just checking in with each other about meaning and values. And this sounds like it's not important, but it becomes incredibly important when you're looking at balancing generations like that. You're holding two tensions. and you need to get along, you need to get together, because ultimately you need each other. So how do you do that? And that really begins and ends with communication.
So, and that's really about bridging the generational gap. I think every generation feels, oh my God, with my parents' generation, I have such a big gap. Next generation will not be such a big gap, right? So that's the perception we have. And of course, the importance of really meaningful engagement, right? Quality time is, where you communicate with each other about your feelings, about your emotions, what you're going through as well, right? How conscious are children today about what their parents are going through, or let's say those who are in their 20s, 30s, or 40s? How much can they relate to what their parents or their older generations going through at their 50s, 60s, and 70s? What do we think about that?
You'll be surprised. Your children do know what you're going through, because they could sense, yeah, whether you did, whether you did not reveal to them about the financial crisis that the family has, but by your words, can you please save up? Can you don't waste it? Can you don't waste simply buy stuff? They kind of could sense, yeah. And we have this phenomena called the parentified child. So in many ways, your children are taking care of your emotion. How? By not troubling you with their trouble, because they know parents are very stressed out already. Yeah. So therefore, they would rather just keep it to themselves or keep it to their friends. So when you talk about whether they could recognize, I would say they could recognize. Yeah. And back to what the empowering the older generation. As I reflect, my own life, if I were to get into that category, I would really wish I would be at the category of empowering the younger generation. But yet at the same time, learning is lifelong. Yeah. So we are talking about, empower, or what I want to be empowered in. Let's say like right now, technology is a big thing. And I was not born in the era of technology. Yeah, so I would want to really learn, how social media work. In the future, we don't know what else, technology will evolve into. Yeah, and I also remember I attended one conference. It's a family conference, and the people who handle the counters, you know what? They are the older generation. To me, it was like it's pretty impressive. Sometimes we thought, oh, let the young people man the counter, make them be the runner. But when I was just observing, it's all the older adults. We want to make them still feel useful, and they really have the time to volunteer in all these events. And I guess that's one way we can really empower them to
That,
be
that's a
useful.
that's a great suggestion. And Dr. Yo, I would like to also share. All of us actually have a Monash connection, and the Monash University, particularly the Australian campus I've seen, for the invigilation that takes place for exams, they usually hire those who are older adults as well, right, to get them feel connected again with the education sector, and also like exams, and running the exams as well. So this really, and I want to share as well that there was a time a few years back that I spent a few weeks, right, actually, with an aunt of mine in Canberra, and I began to actually really see from their side as well the challenges they go through to continue to feel relevant, continue to feel that they have a role, they are important. I think this is something that we often forget in this equation about empowerment, is that not only is it about empowering the young people, but the fact that it often comes at the cost of another important segment of population, the older adults, who feel less important and less relevant, right? So where do we strike this balance there here? We have spoken today about the challenges that the older generation faces, the younger generation faces. How, I mean, communication is a key, the key method there that we can use to engage with each other. And how can we build further on this? I would say a symbiotic relationship, right? Almost like reinforcing each other. What other suggestions would you have?
I really like what I've heard you say about the elderly sort of invigilating exams for the very young. That's a golden opportunity, I think, for connection, for young people to see oh, look at someone who's my granduncle's age or my granddad's age, doing this. Wow, I see him in my own space, the space I'm very familiar with, and that is that builds connection. And for the elderly person, and also, chances are you're going to come up with a more sympathetic role model invigilator who understands you, might be more simple. He's a grandfatherly figure or a grandmotherly figure, and that's beautiful. And I think that's what connectivity on a society level is all about. So I think we do need to look for more opportunities for this sort of intergenerational meeting to come in, and even something as small as an invigilation. That's wonderful. And for example, in my hospice, just to use a very small example, we have student volunteers coming in, and they're incredibly young, and they're always surprised when they come in and they come across a very old uncle so volunteering. And we always thought they wouldn't get along, but actually now we deliberately put them together, because during lunch or during breaks we see them sharing stories. The old uncle will say, okay, what's going on now in the digital world, I don't understand. And they get feedback from a non-family member, which is very valuable and very interesting to them. And then the younger person goes, wow, this is, I didn't know I could talk to an older person like that. So we really need more opportunities. And I think that's on us, as adults, to create such opportunities, and not just within family, but within community as well. I think we have to play that part, so that it's not so isolated, that people have the chance to interact and sort of stretch their idea of what somebody from a totally different age group is like.
and
Yeah.
stories connecting us, right? And I would also like to bring here the example of none other than our very respected former Prime Minister Tun Dr. Mahathir Mohamad. At his age of 95, he's probably more energetic than most of us in this panel, you see. So I think that also helps us break some of the stereotypes we have. The empowerment group was very privileged to ask him a question at a conference, and he was spot on talking about how mental health is affecting the young generation. So I guess that also breaks the stereotypes that we often have, right? That someone who's old would be, would be probably staying at home, would not be active. Where Tun Mahathir is biking 5 kilometers in the morning. So what are the lessons that we have here from either Tun Mahathir and others of his age who remain that active, mentally and physically, right? What are some of the things? What's the secret to their youth? So, if I may say that.
I think if you look at Tun himself, he is close to his grandchildren, and he actually listens and has conversation with his grandchildren, who are very, very, very young. They are filmmakers. They go on to do artistic things, and he listens to what they think and what they want out of things. And he has, I believe, has even collaborated on projects with them. So that's a good example of intergeneration cooperation. And in fact, there's studies coming out now where homes which are built, which elderly homes, for example, which allows interaction with, say, a kindergarten in the neighborhood, or which has sort of joint activities where they help perhaps mine or teach skills to the much younger population, show amazing mental health benefits on both sides of the spectrum, to the child and to the elderly. So that's something I definitely see societies all over the world heading towards in the not too far future, actually.
No, that's and absolutely, and building on collaborative projects, right? And I think referring to Tun, like the M for Malaysia, right? About 3 generations together. Tun was the star, of course, of the documentary, produced by his daughter and also directed by the granddaughter. So really, I think engagement, right, across generations, I think is really important there. So look, we talked a lot today about the young, the young, the children. We talked a lot about the older generation, and both by the WHO definition and also elderly adults. We've also spoken about Tun. But then now comes this another group that we perhaps should not ignore, those who are in the middle. And we're talking here about youth, about young adults. What are some of the challenges for their empowerment, right? So, I mean, maybe I'll pass this question to Erin, right, to start us off, and then we can build on that. So, Erin, off to you.
Yeah, right. Okay. When we are looking at the empowerment in young adults, in teenagers, we are looking at how they can build their sense of identity in terms of how they can believe in themselves, how they can have their voice being listened to by others, how they can make a changes. I think this is one of the phrase that many young adults and teenagers especially likes to use. They want to make changes, right? But there are some challenges that they are facing. Some of it is, as we are talking about intergenerational gap, right? We are looking at how is their family sometimes, there is lack of attachment between the teenagers and the parents, because the parents have to work. Both parents have to work when they have a lack of guidance in terms of how they can understand things throughout during that period of uh, identity formation period, right? And then we are looking also at social media, definitely. This is a time where everything is online. Social media is very much important. And there are, uh, it's more like a irresponsible action that sometimes can damage the can harm the 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 sense of identity of those teenagers, especially because they spend most of the time in their social media, looking at cyberbullying. We are looking at comparing themselves to all unrealistic expectation that people are putting in on the social medias, right? And we are also look how does all these things make them feel. Can be lack of acceptance in terms of themselves, how they can accept themselves when they are comparing everything, when they're comparing everything to what is on the social media, when they are not sure who they are, they have no lack of guidance, So all these are the challenges that I would say the young people are facing right now. Yeah.
So, and these challenges, right, go back again to, I mean, whether, look, the internet empowers them, but I think the question you're bringing is it also comes with certain risks and costs, right? So, social media, internet can be a great enabler when it comes to the young generation, but we also have to be really careful about some of the risks that they face. And we do know that there's sexual predators out there, and it's in our interest, right, that to how can we let them explore, but also let them remain safe. And that's why again you brought up the issue. I think if the one word that keeps coming back again and again today is communication, right? And that how parents who are working full time, how can they continue to really engage with their with their children? There's another aspect here, which is the parents themselves, middle-aged parents, let's say in the late 30s, 40s, right? And some of their own challenges they're going through, right? In a society that, we're talking about empowering the elderly and the younger, it's almost like they can be sandwiched in between, that no one's here talking about the young adults and the pressure they go through. Some of the surveys we have seen in Malaysia coming out from the pandemic show that working from home, one major issue was really that the pressure for family, right, in a way. So how do we really establish, right, a healthy environment within the family where all generations can actually have their space, their boundaries, but also connect and communicate with each other? So that's a challenge. And on top of it, of course, the pressure of the family, because if you look at it this way, the young adults have to take care of the children and sometimes the elderly living with them as
Yes.
well. So the pressure is intense there. Any thoughts on that from the panel?
I think what they really have one of the highest pressure situations today, the people in the sandwich generation, because they are dealing, they're at the time of life where any problem that comes to them are serious problems, that they're not going to be, I failed an exam, and or my friend doesn't want to talk to me. They're going to be, I lost someone has been diagnosed with cancer. So I have a debt collector knocking on my door, really serious issues that they're probably dealing with for the first time in their life. And it's almost devastating in nature, because the only way they would have seen that very often would have been in TV, or some sort of some amazing story that's hard to believe. And when it happens to them, they it's almost with a sense of disbelief, some sort of disconnect, that is this really happening to me? Is this really my life? And that let's talk about how that impacts communication. When you've got so much on your mind, you haven't really been taught, and we spoke very briefly about education, but also we've never been taught skills on how to manage stress, not in school. We've not been taught skills on how to communicate. So we come back home and we're dealing with all that, and the burden is much larger than we expect, especially in the pandemic year. And then we our depleted resources, we're expected to somehow figure out communication, and then everyone in the house is also sort of putting it on us, like you're the main person who's bringing in the bacon. You lead the way. You tell us how to communicate. So that kind of pressure and that sort of expectation is sometimes it's the straw that breaks the camel's back. And why we hear about all this pressure, mounting and then bursting one day in the home, or entire families just suddenly, having meltdowns, is really because of that. And there's so little support for this layer of people, this age group, as well as the pressure to look like everything's okay. That's tragic, actually.
And the pressure that builds up on a daily basis, right? Builds up, and we all know that. Look, the community knowledge about mental health until the pandemic was really low, but thankfully in the last 18 months, right, we've seen a lot of awareness. I think, particularly the mental health scene in Malaysia has been really vibrant and active. So there's a more awareness than ever. But having said that, the stigma still is there in terms of seeking help if you need to seek help. So, and that's where really it escalates. So, look, that brings us to, the final part of our discussion today. We have talked about from the panel some of the empowerment challenges faced by the young, by the elderly, and also those who are in the middle, whether they're teenagers or young adults, right? So I would like to now just, pass this to each one of you in turn, one by one, to talk about maybe from your work, right, in the mental health space or in the community space, what can we what is the way forward? What are some of the suggestions that you have, whether it's within the work? We didn't have much chance to talk today about the workplace setting, but let's bear in mind that this is also a same challenge in the work, because there's certain people who are getting older, and then in the workforce who have a lot of experience, and younger people who are coming in who may not have that experience, and then those who are in the middle who feel that, okay, I'm sandwiched in three generations. So whether workplace or home, we do have this challenge here, right, of intergenerational relationship that can actually empower each of those groups. So I'd like to draw from your experiences in this in the mental health community space to share some tips and suggestions that you have for any age group. So I'll start off with Dr. Paley, please.
Okay, so I think if we want to uh, see ourselves living till the age of soon, we need to do self care. Yeah. So my parting word is really about caring for yourselves. Yeah, and then when we talk about self care, there are five components. We need to take care of our spiritual selves. Yeah, we need to take care of our physical selves. Yeah, we need to take care of our emotional self, relational selves. Yeah, and our mental selves. Yeah. So if we don't have a healthy mind, we don't have a healthy body. So when you talk about stigma, if at all you doubt yourself, am I crazy? Why am I, can't stop thinking? Why can't I sleep? Yeah, why can't my mind go to rest? Then you know what? Why don't you just go for a checkup? Go and see us. Go and talk to a counselor so that the earlier you get an answer to what's going on in you, the recovery, or you will make sense of what's going on inside you. Yeah.
So
And
seeking help
also,
is simple. Good, Doctor, yes, please. No, continue. Please continue.
and also, we also must take care of our vocational selves. Vocational selves, you look at Tun. Tun really give us a lot of inspiration. He is really living out his passion. Yeah. He may start off as a doctor, but eventually when he went to politics, he is, even though he's retired politician, but he's still very much a politician. Yeah. So I think if we learn to find our life purpose, I think that will bring us very far, because we will just love what we are doing, and the motivation is from inside us. Yeah, not being pushed by external, not being pressured. Yeah. So I think
Such
that
a
will really give life meaning.
such an important point, right? Self-care, and also having that motivation and passion, right? And when it comes to career choices, quite often we find it very difficult to explore other options, right? But at the same time, we see many people who have mid-career try to explore different profession, other occupations, and that has actually led to more meaningful outcomes. So thank you, Dr. Yo, for that. I'll next pass to Erin, please. Erin, your last thoughts on really this empowerment puzzle, right? And we're talking here about empowering the communities with mental health across generations. So, Erin, what are your thoughts?
Yes, I think when we are talking about empowering the community, empowering other people, it's always have to begin with ourselves. We have to empower ourselves first. You know how we can, as Dr. Penny said, right? How we can take care of ourselves. It's more about, uh, from my side, it's more about tuning in to ourselves. Listen to what we feel, how we feel, what we think, and also trust ourselves, because like when we are able to trust ourselves, when we are able to listen to ourselves, then we know what we need, what kind of things that we can do to fulfill that need, so that in that sense it empowers ourselves too. And the second one, probably, that I never get tired of this, is to be kind to ourselves and to other people. It's always something that I say to in many things, because when we are in, especially facing all these intergenerational mental health, right? When we're able to be kind to ourselves, then we can connect to other people as well. We can be kinder to other people as well. So that is the support and sense of belonging that we create, that we empower our surrounding. Yeah.
And across generations, right? So
Yeah.
improve every kindness, check in, and kindness breeds kindness, right? And if we are kind to ourselves, we are likely to be kinder to people around us as well. And
Yes.
and the communication that we spoke so much today about, right? The foundation of that really can be kindness in that sense. So thank you for that, Erin. So off to you finally, last but not least, Catherine.
Okay, I just want to shout out to Sin Fong Chan, who was asking about on the younger generation learning the skills to communicate from their seniors. So I'll just leave with that, which is an extension of what Erin is saying. Kindness is the best communication tool. If you don't know anything, or you feel, oh, I don't have the skills, you have it within yourself already. If you use kindness in your expression, you will never be misunderstood. Somehow people will open the channel for more conversation, more meaning making to happen, and that's how we all go forward. In deaf and dying communication, I'll just leave you with a final tip. We borrow sometimes from a Hawaiian practice of ho'oponopono. It says, I'm sorry, please forgive me, I forgive you, thank you, and I love you. So these are the four things that are very, very important to say, regardless of your age, regardless of the situation. And I hope everyone has the courage to have these conversations and say these four things to people that they care about. Thank you.
Such an important point again, Catherine, really, and also building on kindness being such an important tool. That brings us to the final part of the session. I'll wrap up now. Thank you very much for our panel, for your insights and some sharing on how really we can have a more healthier relationships within the family setting for intergenerational empowerment. I also want to highlight here the point before we conclude of the intergenerational mental health aspect, right? That whether it's trauma or it could be the other side as well, right? Whether it's emotional stability, in many ways, there's an intergenerational aspect of it. As much as we deny, right, a lot of what we learn is really from our parents, right? And sometimes what we learn is also difficult to unlearn. So in that context, right, parents can play such an important role in being models for children in terms of the behaviors of kindness, compassion, and that spirit that has to of learning from each other. And that's where charity begins at home. If we want to have intergenerational empowerment, we need to start today from home. Start listening. If you're a younger person, try to connect more with your either your parents or your grandparents. And if you're some in the older generation, maybe it's time to tune in to an emotional check-in with how your children are feeling. With that, we can have a more of an intergenerational approach where young people and adults can work together in addressing many of the social problems that we are going through. We're in this together, and the pandemic has also taught us, right, how we can come together, and it's an opportunity for us to really spend some time with each other. So thank you very much again, and I hope that our discussion today will be the start of more conversations like this on how we can be more inclusive within the family, kinder, compassionate, to really empower each other, because this empowerment is not only about like having our voice and having our say, but it's also about better mental health outcomes and better well-being and better lives for all of us. So thank you very much again. Good night to all of you, and we hope to continue the conversation. And thank you again, Andrea, for your support in bringing together this panel from the Empowerment Group. A big thank you. And to all those of our viewers and those who have left questions and comments, we have tried to address them in our discussion today, and let this conversation continue. Good night, thank you, and stay safe and stay well. All the best from the Empowerment Group.